Hello everyone, and welcome to Hidden Korea. Tonight, we invite you to dive with us into a story that has sent shockwaves across the nation. Mei Mei breaks her silence. The hidden truth about Long shocks the entire nation. For 2 long years, whispers, rumors, unanswered questions have circled this mysterious relationship. But today, the silence ends. The curtain rises. And what lies behind it is darker, deeper, more explosive than anyone ever imagined. Stay with us, because the truth you are about to witness will change everything. Let's begin. For months, a quiet tension had been lingering in the entertainment world, an unspoken electricity that everyone felt but no one could explain. Mei Mei, once a radiant figure whose every smile lit up stages, had retreated into a strange silence. Her fans waited. Her colleagues speculated. And the entire nation wondered why someone so full of life had suddenly vanished from the spotlight. But no one expected the storm that silence was hiding. Morning, when her name suddenly trended at lightning speed, the country held its breath. A single sentence from her private social account leaked, "I can't hold this truth alone anymore." Those words detonated across the internet like an explosion. Scrambled. Reporters rushed to find sources. Producers begged for exclusive interviews. And behind it all, one name kept surfacing like a shadow rising from the flame: Long. Before the silence, their relationship had been the epitome of a dream, 2 rising stars, 2 brilliant futures intertwined. They were inseparable on camera and even more inseparable behind it. But hidden behind their glittering chemistry was a growing darkness no one could see. It began subtly: Long canceling schedules without warning, avoiding public appearances, ignoring her calls for days. Rumors circulated that something had happened, something he refused to reveal. Truth was far more sinister than anyone imagined. On the night everything changed, Mei Mei had arrived at the rehearsal studio early, expecting a long practice and an even longer conversation with him. She needed answers: why he had grown distant, why he kept disappearing, why his eyes flickered with fear whenever she mentioned the future. Instead, she walked into a room filled with broken glass, shattered lights, and the trembling echo of a fight that had already happened. And Long was standing in the center of it all, like a man who had just seen his entire world collapse. He didn't speak at first. He didn't even look at her. Instead, whispered a single sentence that froze her blood: "Someone's watching us." She laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. But then she saw it: the panic in his eyes, the trembling in his hands, and the envelope on the table marked only with her initials. Inside were photos, timestamps, conversations printed out, all documenting every place they had been, every private moment they believed was theirs. A blackmailer? Or something darker? Long refused to say. He begged her to leave him, to cut ties before she was dragged into something she couldn't escape. But she stayed, determined to pull him out of whatever darkness had swallowed him. Days turned into weeks. The messages grew more threatening. Anonymous calls started arriving every night. And slowly, the Long she knew began to disappear beneath a fear he refused to explain. Then came the night she would never forget. The night she found him standing in the rain, holding a burned phone in one hand and a broken expression on his face. The night he confessed that everything, from their first meeting to their most intimate memories, had been manipulated by a powerful figure who wanted to control him. Someone who had been pulling strings for years. Someone who had warned him that being with her would ruin the plan. And that was when Mei Mei understood why he had been pushing her away, not out of indifference, but out of terror. But the truth didn't set them free. It only tightened the chains. Everything escalated the moment she tried to help him uncover the identity behind the threats. More letters arrived. More warnings. And then, her family became targets. Her manager received a final message: "If she doesn't walk away, you'll all pay the price." That was the night Mei Mei disappeared, the night she chose silence over destruction. But today, after months of vanishing from the public eye, she returned to break that silence. And the truth she was about to reveal would shake the entire nation to its core. When Mei Mei appeared before the cameras again, wasn't the same woman the world remembered. Gone was the carefree sparkle in her eyes. In its place stood a fierce determination. A quiet rage that suggested she had spent endless nights wrestling with a truth too heavy for any one person to carry. As she sat down, the room filled with reporters suddenly fell silent. Everyone waited. Everyone watched. And when she spoke, her voice trembled, not with fear, but with power. "I'm going to tell you everything," she began. And in that moment, a collective shiver moved through the country. She revealed that the shadow behind Yulong's suffering was not a mysterious outsider, not a deranged fan or a secret enemy, but someone shockingly close to him. Someone the public trusted. Someone who had built an entire empire off his success. This person had orchestrated his career from the very beginning, controlling every decision, every move, every relationship. Terrified that anyone, especially young Mei Mei, might pull him out of their grasp. The more she spoke, the more the truth twisted into something darker. She described secret meetings held late at night, with Yulong returning home pale and shaken. She spoke of contracts he was forced to sign, binding him to decisions that broke him inside. She explained how every attempt he made to escape was crushed by threats disguised as professional guidance. And when the controlling figure realized that Yang Mei Mei had become the only person he trusted, the pressure turned malicious. The threats escalated beyond words. Evidence surfaced, video clips, hidden recordings, timed messages meant to break his spirit. Yang Mei Mei revealed that Yulong was once forced to stand alone in that broken rehearsal room because he had refused to cut her out of his life. The shattered lights, the fear, the tremble in his voice, it had all been the aftermath of a warning he dared not repeat. But she continued fighting for him anyway. She followed leads. She confronted people in the industry. Risked her own reputation, her own safety. Every step brought her closer to horrifying truth. Yulong had been living under surveillance for over 2 years. Not by an outsider but by the very person who claimed to protect him. When she discovered the final piece of evidence, the original contract revealing the extent of the control, she was told to disappear or risk everything. The threats became personal. Her family was watched. Movements tracked. And that was the moment she chose to fall silent, not out of fear, but because she needed time to gather every piece of truth before coming back stronger. Now, she faced the nation with all of it in her hands. Held up a folder filled with documents. The room erupted into chaos. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. Phones rang non-stop as breaking news alerts exploded across every major platform. Meanwhile, Yulong, who had been hidden away for months, was now thrust back into the spotlight with the truth finally exposed. The final blow came when Yang Mei Mei ended her speech with a single, chilling sentence. "He wasn't distant because you stopped loving me. Distant because someone was destroying him from the inside." The nation froze. Millions tuned in. Every word she spoke became a spark in a rapidly spreading firestorm. Support poured in for both of them. Plans for investigations flooded online forums. Influencers dissected every detail. Former staff members began leaking their own stories, supporting her claims. Yulong's silence was no longer a mystery. It was a tragedy created by manipulation, fear, and control. And Yang Mei Mei, breaking her own silence, had finally shattered the chains around both of them. But the shockwave had only just begun. Because with the truth revealed, the nation now waited for what would happen next, whether the hidden figure would fight back, whether the industry would collapse under the scandal, whether this long nightmare would finally come to an end. One thing was certain. The truth, once buried, had risen. And nothing would ever be the same again. The chaos that followed Yang Mei Mei's revelation was unlike anything the nation had ever seen. Within minutes, the entertainment industry, usually polished, controlled, and meticulously curated, descended into a frenzy of accusations, denials, and desperate attempts to bury the truth. Agencies scrambled to release statements. Lawyers were summoned in the middle of the night. Anonymous insiders began leaking fragments of information that connected like pieces of a giant, ominous puzzle. The entire country watched as the quiet world behind the glamour began to crack open, revealing the rot underneath. The storm, one question echoed louder than all others: where was Yulong? Yang Mei Mei's confession had sparked a manhunt, not by authorities, but by fans, reporters, and even industry players terrified of what he might reveal if found. Rumors spread that he had gone abroad. Claimed he had been hidden away by his agency, trapped somewhere far from the public eye. A few whispered the most chilling theory of all, that the person controlling him had finally silenced him for good. Yang Mei Mei refused to believe it. Even after everything, the threats, the disappearances, the long nights wondering whether he was alive, She held on to a single truth: he was still out there, waiting for someone to pull him out of the nightmare he'd been forced into. And so she began her own quiet search, following every lead, every message, every shadow of information that might lead her back to him. One night, while scrolling through hundreds of anonymous messages from people claiming to know his whereabouts, she spotted something strange: a blurry photograph taken in the reflection of a cafe window. The picture wasn't clear. Outline, the posture, the subtle tilt of the head, it was him. Timestamp was only hours old. And the location was close, shockingly close. Without hesitation, she rushed out into the cold night, her heart racing with a mix of hope and terror. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Yu Long sat alone in a dimly lit hotel room, curtains drawn tight. His hands trembled as he replayed the broadcast of her confession. Every word she spoke hit him like lightning: the truth he had been too afraid to expose, the suffering he had endured in silence. He had tried to protect even when it meant breaking both their hearts. He hadn't expected her to fight for him, expected her to risk everything. But when he saw her standing there, courage burning in her eyes, something inside him cracked open. For the first time in months, he felt hope. Hope was dangerous. He knew that the moment he stepped outside, the person who had controlled him for years would know. Had lived under invisible surveillance for so long that even breathing felt like a risk. He stood by the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold and white, wondering whether he had any strength left to face the world again. He didn't know that at that very moment, Yang Mei Mei was racing through the same streets, searching for him with the determination of someone who had already lost too much and refused to lose any more. She had no plan, no guarantee he would be there. Something deeper than logic pulled her forward, an instinct shaped by years of connection, fear, and unspoken understanding. When she finally reached the cafe from the photo, the lights were already off. The chairs were stacked. The street was empty. But then she noticed something faint on the ground: a receipt. From the cold, with a single name scribbled on the back. A name only the two of them used. A private nickname he had once given her. Her breath caught. He had been here. Had left her a sign. She followed a trail through narrow alleys, across busy intersections, through the heartbeat of a city that seemed to pulse with tension. Step felt heavier, the weight of everything they had endured pressing down on her. And then, as she turned a corner near a quiet hotel entrance, she stopped. A figure emerged slowly from the shadows. Hesitant. Familiar. Stopped. But just as the silhouette came into full view, a noise echoed from behind her, a car door slamming, heavy footsteps rushing forward, a voice shouting for them to stop. Whipped around, eyes wide, and saw two men in dark coats darting toward her. Panic surged through her. They weren't reporters. They weren't fans. They were the very people she had been warned about. Before she could react, someone grabbed her wrist, and she turned back to see him. Yu Long. Exhausted, terrified, but unmistakably alive. His eyes locked onto hers with a desperate urgency. "We have to leave," he whispered, his voice raw. "You're here because of me." But she shook her head, gripping his hand tightly. "No. They're here because of what they did to you. I'm not leaving without you." The approaching footsteps grew louder. Shadows stretched across the pavement, the air filled with the suffocating pressure of danger closing in. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, suspended in a fragile, trembling silence. Everything exploded into motion. Yu Long pulled her down a side alley, their footsteps pounding against the cold concrete. The men shouted, chasing them through the maze of narrow streets. Honked. Lights flickered. The city roared around them as if alive, pushing them forward, urging them to run faster. The turn felt like a dead end, every shadow like a trap. But they didn't stop. They couldn't stop. Behind them, the dark figure who had controlled him for years had finally shown his hand. And ahead of them stretched a path neither of them had ever dared to walk. A path toward exposing everything, fighting back, and reclaiming the lives that had been stolen from them. The deeper they ran into the night, the clearer it became. It was no longer just about survival. This was the beginning of a battle far bigger than anything they had ever imagined. A battle that would decide not only their fate, but of an entire industry built on secrets. Night finally surrendered to dawn. The city awakened to truth it could no longer ignore. The chase, the revelations, shattered illusions, it all converged into a single moment where Yulong and Yang Mei Mei stood side by side. As victims of a hidden darkness, but as survivors who had chosen to rise above it. Their story, once buried under manipulation and fear, had erupted into a blazing movement that shook every corner of the industry. Voices that had once been silent now spoke. Walls that had hidden corruption for years began to crumble. And the faceless power that had dictated their lives was finally forced into the light. The nation watched as the truth continued to spread. Unstoppable and irreversible. But amid the chaos, one thing remained clear: Yang Mei Mei's courage had not only saved Yulong, it had ignited a fire that could not be extinguished. Their fight was far from over, and the road ahead would be long, uncertain, and filled with battles they had yet to face. First time, they were no longer running. They were ready. And as their story closed its final chapter, at least for now, the world understood one undeniable truth. Silence may be powerful, but truth is stronger. Thank you to everyone who stood by them, who demanded answers, who refused to let fear win. To the countless viewers who followed this journey from the first whisper to the explosive end. Your voices, your strength, and your unwavering support made this story more than a scandal, it made it a turning point. This is not just the end of a revelation. It is the beginning of a new era. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for believing in the truth. We will return with more stories, more courage, and more revelations soon.